Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever in the world you may be joining us from today. My name is Francesco Del Carpio, and I am the CFAL York Operations Coordinator. I would like to officially open the ninth and final session in our 2025 Emergency Management in Hospitals and Healthcare Speaker Series, which is presented in partnership with the Thunder Bay Regional Health Sciences Center. I would like to begin today with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territory upon which our campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The area is known as Tkaronto and has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. As this is an online event and our participants may be joining from various locations, I strongly encourage you to learn about the traditional land upon which you are located. With this, I welcome our moderator, our speaker, and our participants from around the world. Welcome to our webinar. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Misha Richard. Misha Richard is the Emergency Preparedness Lead at Thunder Bay Regional Health Science Center and facilitator for the CFAL York TBRHSC series and will be moderating today's session. For the sake of time, Misha's full bio and the full bio of today's speaker will be shared in the chat. Misha, thank you very much for moderating today's session and your ongoing help in putting together this series. The floor is yours.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. So I will start off first by just that little housekeeping reminder for any folks that are newly joining us and haven't heard this spiel before. Everyone is muted, but we have two opportunities to communicate with each other. So one is we do have the chat. It's open for all the participants. Have a dialogue together. If you have a question that's specific for our speaker today, we do have our Q&A. So please put your questions into that space. And I will do my best to moderate them as we go along and leave a little bit of time for some questions at the end. So without further ado, I will introduce Dave to you all. So welcome, Dave Saunders. He's a Provincial Health Emergency Continuity Management Coordinator. It's a little bit of a mouthful with Newfoundland Health Services. He specializes in healthcare system preparedness, response, and recovery, and has significant experience, I would say, in the last little while of managing responses to multiple wildland and interface fires across Newfoundland and Labrador, including the evacuation and safe repatriation of healthcare facilities in Labrador during summer fires 2024. So, as Francesco said, we've got the full bio in the chat, so you can see a little bit more about Dave there. But since he's got a pretty full presentation, I'm going to turn the mic over to him now. So thank you very much for joining us today, Dave. Excited to hear about your experiences with evacuation.
Thanks, Misha. I'm really actually excited to be here and to talk about this stuff. It's a bit of a passion of mine as well. What I'm here today to talk about is from evacuation to recovery, lessons from the North Shore fire that happened in August in Newfoundland and Labrador. So just a brief agenda of what I'll kind of go over today. And bear with me a little bit. I usually tell really bad dad jokes, so just please bear with me. But we're going to give a brief overview of Newfoundland Labrador Health Services, or NLHS. We'll talk about our interface fire plan. Then we'll talk about NLHS's Eastern Rural Zone fire timeline, because there was actually more than one. We'll get into the Emergency Operations Center for how we managed the response to it, talk about the community impact, recovery, and then finally what we learned. So an overview of NL Health Services. We're a province-wide integrated healthcare system responsible for delivering health services to more than 500,000 people, Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. We're supported by over 22,000 employees, with over 1,100 physicians and over 1,800 volunteers. We cover a broad range of programs and services through a large suite of facilities, clinics, and community services overseen in 5 zones. So we have Central Zone, Eastern Rural Zone, which is where I'm located, Eastern Urban Zone, Labrador-Grenfell Zone, and Western Zone. Here's just a basic breakdown of Newfoundland and Labrador showing the zones. So you can see Labrador-Grenfell in green, Western Zone in blue, Central in yellow, light red or pink, I guess, is Eastern Rural Zone. This is primarily where we're going to talk about today, in Eastern Rural. And Eastern Urban Zone, if you're familiar with Newfoundland Labrador, that would be where St. John's is, or the population center. So at NL HS, we have a vision, and our vision is health and well-being, every person, every community. And our values are I care. So we believe in innovation, compassion, accountability, respect, and excellence. So why I bring this up is that throughout the response to the fires, one thing that was really empowering and inspiring working with NLHS is that our mission and our values really led the way. So I'll talk about that a little further as we go along. So in Eastern Rural Zone specifically, we have five acute care facilities, which account for about 240 beds. We have Carbonear General Hospital and Private Josiah Squibb Memorial Pavilion, which is a long-term care facility that's attached. Carbonear General Hospital has 79 acute care beds. We also have Dr. A. Wilkinson Health Center that has five acute care beds. So those were in the area of impact of the Northern Shore. We also have four long-term care facilities, which account for about 700 beds, and Private Josiah Squibb Memorial Pavilion. Sorry, I'm just going to call it PJSMP moving forward because it's a mouthful. Has 230 long-term care beds. Included with this in the zone, we have eight personal care homes with about 500 beds. Three of them in the North Shore area of impact had 300 beds, and four of them were actually evacuated in the Holyrood Paddy's Pond fire area, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And then on top of all this, we have community-based programs servicing thousands within the community. So Eastern Rural Zone is actually the second largest zone in Newfoundland and Labrador, next to Eastern Urban with the population center. So as a result of the fires, it's not last summer anymore, it's the summer before in 2024. We evacuated Labrador City and Churchill Falls evacuated as well. And a lot of the debrief came from that. We learned an awful lot. Out of that, we actually developed an interface fire plan, which consists of four different levels. So it's level 1 to 4. You know, we're rocket scientists here. We come up with really clever things. But level 1 is monitor. Level 2 is alert. Level 3 is a partial activation. So that would be an NLHS, a zonal emergency operations center. And level 4 would be a full response. So that when we would have a corporate EOC or emergency operations center that would make business decisions on behalf of NLHS. So to give you kind of a brief summary timeline of the North Shore fire, it started August 4th, and it really wrapped up response-wise on the 28th. So as you can kind of imagine here, this is a brief overview, but this was a 24-day event, which usual events that we deal with are anywhere from 24 to 36 hours. Um, excuse me. So as you can imagine, the operational timelines on this were significant in and of itself, which created its own challenges. This is just a map of the area that we're talking about because I'm assuming a lot of people on the call aren't overly familiar with Newfoundland Labrador. So right here, this is St. John's. This is where the North Shore fire was, or the Kingston, and it expanded from Northern Bay down here right to about where Route 70 is. It's a pretty significant area. Just as a point of reference, I actually live in and around this area here. And this is St. John's, Mount Pearl Paradise, CBS. This is considered the metro area of Newfoundland Labrador. So the little dots here show you where the fires were. So this is the North Shore fire, this is the Holyrood fire, and that's the Paddy's Pond fire. And we'll talk about them briefly as we go. So for the North Shore fire, it started on August 4th. It was originally called the Kingston Fire. So it was Adams Cove and Kingston, the two municipalities there. They were evacuated. And we activated the new interface fire plan to level 1. What this entailed was a leadership group came together because those communities didn't actually have any NLHS facilities. So there was no current impact, even though the communities were evacuated. However, what we learned from the Labrador Grenfell fires in summer 2024, with briefings from the incident management team with forestry, that once a fire reaches a certain size, the only thing that really puts it out is a weather change. And what we were looking at was weather projections showing no rain and 30 plus degrees for the next 7 days. Um, People familiar with Newfoundland Labrador, this is very uncommon, Newfoundland Labrador. Like we get weather all the time. We actually have a snowstorm today. So it was kind of unprecedented, and we were very nervous because we also didn't have snow that winter. So we knew that the ground was really dry as well. Um, On the 5th, the Kingston fire expanded and the town of Western Bay was evacuated. We note this here because the town was actually evacuated at 11 o'clock at night. All the residents got emergency alerts on their phone at 11 o'clock and told them all to leave. So that was somewhat traumatic for the community and a significant experience. But for NLHS, we actually have a clinic there, and that meant that that clinic was impacted. Um, there was changes for how evac orders got disseminated after this, almost immediate after. Municipalities went into an alert mode before they went into a mandatory evacuation, so at least people would know. They would have time to prepare and that kind of thing. It wouldn't be as jarring at 11 o'clock at night. Included with this was a Holyrood fire. So portions of Holyrood and several personal care homes were evacuated on the 5th. And as a result of that, we actually increased our fire plan to a level 2 because we had the community services building impact. We didn't go to level 3 because in Newfoundland, Labrador, the personal care home program, it's a little bit of a nuance. They're licensed through NL Health Services, but they're privately owned. So the private owners were actually largely responsible for the evacuation. We supported them in various ways. Like if they couldn't, if the evac centers didn't have capacity, then we looked to our facilities to help shoulder that burden. A couple of them actually went in the eastern rural zone down in what we consider Placentia in one of our long-term care homes down there. But overall, it's largely the private owner's responsibility. So that's why we didn't go to level 3 with that per se. So this is a pretty good picture of Western Bay and when they were ordered to evacuate. And as they ordered them, they also advised Ocrapic Cove at that time to prepare to evacuate. They since changed that to evacuation alerts instead of just saying prepare and that kind of thing. And this is a representation from, I think it's the Weather Network that put it out. So you can see here the Holyrood fire is right here. That's out of control. The Kingston fire is out of control here. And I'm not going to talk about it a whole lot in this, but we are a provincial program for NL Health Services. So our team consists of about 6 folks that all kind of do the role that I do, but in different zones. So this fire here was in Central Zone. And the reason why it was significant is there's a highway that runs right down here to Harbour Breton, and there's a healthcare facility down there. So this highway was actually threatening cutting off, or this fire was threatening cutting off the highway down here, which led to extra complications for our team when we were trying to kind of manage through this event. It could have been a lot, but yeah. So on the 10th, the North Shore fire expanded to several communities. The Western Bay Clinic was impacted, but larger evacuations were ordered, and there was an original evacuation shelter that was set up in a town called Victoria that was actually relocated into Carbonear. That really raised fears and concerns in the region as well, because relocating it out of Victoria kind of implied to the residents that it may or may not be safe there. So that created extra challenges in the area. There was good news, however. The Holyrood fire was being held through amazing work from the volunteer fire departments and the staff fire departments, as well as forestry. And they were actually looking at lifting various evac orders there, which was really good on the 10th because it could alleviate some of the strain on our system because we were looking at repatriating the personal care homes. So moving some of the residents that were temporarily sheltered in our Placentia long-term care facility back into the homes. But our interface fire plan remained at level 2. Then August 11th, what is the Paddy's Pond fire? So a fire broke out near St. John's, and what ended up happening was it actually shut down the Trans-Canada Highway, the major highway between that goes into St. John's and then connects the rest of the island, for a couple of days. We basically just immediately went to interface fire plan level 4, full activation. So we then established a zonal eastern rural zone emergency operation center and an eastern urban zone emergency operation center, and then an NLHS EOC that kind of oversaw all of it. There was one other thing that we really like to note on the 11th that I'm sure everybody on the call kind of knows about too, is Newfoundland and Labrador was actually hosting the Canada Games in St. John's and Metro at this time. So you can kind of see here, this is the smoke from the Paddy's Pond fire, which led to a whole bunch of concerns with air quality and that kind of thing. But also, I'm sure everybody is also understands the housing crisis that is kind of unfolding. It's unfolding here too, but we had 6,000 extra people in the metro area. So we were looking at potential evacuations of large parts of metro area, along with what was happening in Holyrood and potentially the North Shore, with no capacity really in and around the metro area to house people. So it really added an extra dynamic to it, the fact that the Canada Games was going on. So here's just an image of the eastern rural area. You can see here the Holyrood fire is being held and the Kingston fire is burning out of control. This was first called the Thomas Pond fire that was out of control and shut down the Trans-Canada. But everybody in the area knows this as Paddy's Pond, so they very quickly just renamed it. Um, yeah, the other thing that this did do is because the population center is here and the larger healthcare centers are here, resources were redeployed from the Kingston fire down to here, which led the Kingston fire to grow a bit more as well. It was just a very challenging time. And this is from NASA. Anybody on the call here, if you're familiar with this website, it shows hotspots. It's actually really cool. I know I have a weird version of what cool is, but it gives you really good kind of information. If it shows up here at one point, it was an active fire. So you can see here, this is the Western Bay Kingston fire, North Shore fire, and this town of Victoria. Carbonear is about right here. Right here is the Paddy's Pond, and this little blurb here is Holyrood, just to kind of give you a perspective of it. Almost created a triangle in and around the area. This is a really cool picture that I just threw in there because I think it's super cool. But on the 12th, they were ordering the evacuation of surrounding areas in Paddy's Pond as well, which put extra strain on our system. So back to the North Shore fire, because that's really what we're talking about. On the 13th, there was a regional state of emergency activated, covering all the communities on the Northern Shore. So this is the Carbonear electoral district, is what they basically made. Everything in white here was under a regional state of emergency. Just a point of clarity on this. This is more basically inside baseball, how emergency operations or emergency management functions in Newfoundland and Labrador. This didn't happen as a result of major concerns of the fire and growing and impacting all these communities. This happened because emergency response is determined by the municipality. They have their own plans. If the municipality is a local service district or unincorporated area, or there's areas that don't have a municipality, the province, there's really no mechanism. So the province came in because there's so many in this area. They just called it a regional state of emergency so that the province could take over through the Provincial Emergency Operations Center. And then this freed up mutual aid agreements and all that, those kinds of things. So volunteer fighters from, say, New Perlican, for example, could come over and assist, and they could coordinate it in a way. It actually really, really, really helped. So it was one of the really good takeaways on that. The hospital in Carbonear, we were working on evacuation planning and smoke mitigation measures through the zone EOC, because at this point, for the next 3 days, we were looking at the winds were going to shift and it was going to blow down this way, which would mean Carbonear, where the hospital is, would be inundated with smoke for about 3 days. And then the Paddy's Pond fire was still out of control. Evac orders were given for parts of the metro region and alerts given for others. Hospitals in St. John's were on alert with evacuation planning and smoke mitigation underway. But one of the things that we did establish in rural zone EOC was a wellness officer, and their team began checking in on all of our staff, addressing concerns, providing comfort and calm as all this was kind of happening in the zone. It was arguably one of the best things that we established through the EOC, because they also were communicating information and relaying to staff and alleviating concerns that, hey, like there's a plan here, which was really, really, really good. The 14th, personally, this was the worst day for me. It was a lot was happening. The fire was growing, and the forecast wasn't looking any better. And the fire was also growing in Paddy's Pond. There was a fire that was started in a cemetery in Spaniards Bay, which is actually really close to my house. Just to give you an idea, this fire was actually started by a glass trinket in a cemetery. That's how conditions were. They were actually telling us not to mow our lawns because a spark from the lawnmower would could create a fire. So tensions in the area were extremely high. Um, and the smoke at this point was also covering Victoria, Carbonear, and most of the peninsula to the south. So, but the cool thing here is that we knew that the smoke mitigation strategies we had in place were actually working, they were effective. To further complicate this, the Department of Forestry made a statement that they were to evaluating evacuating Carbonear, or sorry, not Carbonear, Victoria, based on the extent of the fire and the smoke, and that they'd make a decision by around 3 o'clock that day. So, it was a pretty cool picture, but yeah, I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But this is kind of an image to show you really the extent. So this is Spaniards Bay right here. That's Holyrood, that's Paddy's Pond. This is the Martin Lake fire, which is still out of control. But for whatever reason, it didn't grow and impact the highway. We're not asking questions about it. It just didn't like. And then this is the Burin Peninsula. There was actually a fire down here at one point that didn't make the map, and there was another fire right here on Salmon Line. So basically everything's on fire, right? Like the 14th, everything's on fire. So why I talk about their call for Victoria at 3 o'clock. Naturally, like when you go through these things, you get briefings from the incident management team for forestry, and these guys are very good at what they do. They're very experienced, they know that. But they have different trigger points on where their comfort level is when fire encroaches a municipality. So in this one, the trigger point was basically between these two ponds, and you can see that the fire kind of almost got there. They were hitting this pretty much with everything they have to prevent it. But if it crossed here, then Victoria, in all likelihood, would have been evacuated. And you guys can see kind of the proximity to Carbonear, and the hospital is actually right here. Concerns were such that if Victoria evacuated, we strongly believed that a lot of people in Carbonear would have left too, and that would have created a lot of extra challenges, including staffing implications for the hospital and the long-term care facilities that we have here, because everybody was really, really on edge, right? But thankfully, this was the extent of what the fire went. So on the 15th, the corporate EOC command was planning for worst case scenarios as well as the rural zone and the urban zone EOCs. So we were basically planning for evacuation of two major hospitals on the Northeast Avalon with major impacts to resources, to such a degree that Eastern Rural Zone was basically like, well, we can't, if we have to evacuate people, we can't send them to St. John's, so we have to shelter them in the zones. So the EOC through planning and ops actually identified capacity within our acute care facilities for everybody in the acute care. But the challenge is the 230 long-term care beds that I don't think there's any capacity in any jurisdiction across Canada that can handle 230 beds. So we were looking at standing up local places relatively quickly. And we had planning in place for that, but that would have taken a significant amount of time. The other thing, we were bolstering mental health and primary care supports for the community of the North Shore, and for first responders. When we talk first responders, we're really talking about the volunteer fire departments and anybody like the Red Cross, Salvation Army, any community partners that were really helping. And we were also developing safe work plans for our staff that were now traveling in and out of mandatory evac zones, that were even trying to provide primary care to first responders for the wounds that they were experiencing, like the cuts, the blisters, the burns, those kinds of things. So it was still very much a challenge, and a lot of concerns were had, but we actually felt fairly comfortable through the EOC that we were in a good place if the worst case scenario did happen, though we were really hoping that it wouldn't. So I show you this. We're focusing on the North Shore, but this is the Paddy's Pond fire. This is a rock quarry, and actually, like, huge shout out to those guys who operate this and that kind of thing, because this actually acted as a natural fire break for us, which was great. But forestry focused down here along the highway, because if it went over here, it's not on Google Maps right now, but we all call this Dannyville, or it's Galway. And there's an industrial park right here with some really, really, really interesting things. So if the fire had actually crossed over here, there was significant concerns. I also show you this, guys, just to, you know, as a personal experience. When this all kind of happened, I managed to kind of pack up my kids and move them into Metro because I knew what that would entail and what it would be for us to have to manage this. But I moved them into Powers Pond, or Mount Pearl, which is right here. So I moved them away from where we are to potentially a zone that may have been evacuated. But the other thing that happened here is all of this area around here went on evac alert, and any staff that were kind of living in these areas were now basically told to pack a go bag because if you're on the evac alert, you're not going to get back if it goes mandatory. So what that meant was our staff would show up to work not knowing if they could get back to their house at the end of the day based on how the conditions were kind of going. So they were showing up with all their belongings in their car. They were making arrangements for their families, those kinds of things. The same thing was happening in Carbonear and Carbonear General. And one thing that we actually did through the EOC was we got extra security patrols to go around the parking lot because there was like staff basically had their entire belongings in their car. Very personal belongings that you wouldn't be able to get back if the worst happened. So we were able to mitigate that way, but it also became a challenge and a concern because people have families. And that just kind of bolsters this. So it's one of the takeaways we have on this too, that we really need to be hammering or reinforcing with our staff that like everybody needs their own plans, everybody needs their own personal plans for their families and stuff like that when this happens, because we're likely to be called upon to provide care to people, right? Because if we don't, who will?
Dave, I've got a quick question, just as you were
Shoot.
segueing in slides. So, somebody threw it into the chat, so I'll just use this as a quick reminder to folks that if you have a question that you'd like Dave to address, please throw it in the Q&A and we'll try and moderate that. But someone was asking, where is the actual EOC located? Because you were talking about being in one area, having your family be relocated to another area, but with all these different fires, was there a physical location for your EOC, and what was the proximity of that EOC to one of these potential fires?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. Thanks. I actually didn't include it in here. So the EOC was set up in Carbonear General Hospital. So even then, with the smoke mitigation, for example, like the EOC and senior leadership, we all stayed, every single one of us. So we would have very likely been the last people out. The EOC in Urban was set up at one of our corporate locations. So that's where they were. And then the corporate EOC was largely virtual. And that was mainly because we have provincial programs that oversee everything. So those provincial programs, the leaderships are kind of scattered across. And same thing with supply chain. So yeah, the Eastern Rural Zone EOC was actually based in Carbonear General Hospital, which if we had evacuated, and I know this because I know the leadership involved, if we had to push patients ourselves, we would have been pushing patients ourselves because that's just the way that we roll there. That answer the question? Yeah, cool. So on the 16th, the Paddy's Pond fire was determined to be held through incredible work and coordination with forestry and volunteer fire departments and actually the St. John's Regional Fire Department. The Eastern Urban Zone began demobilizing their emergency operations center because once that fire was out in urban, it was largely went back to business as usual. However, the Kingston fire was still out of control. We did know that our smoke mitigation strategy worked. And finally, at this point, we're 12 days in. The weather is finally starting to look like it's going to be more like a Newfoundland summer, which means that help is on the way. Um, what we ended up doing through the Rural Zone EOC was we identified a need for recovery planning as we started to now see the impact to the community. People started understanding that, several of the communities were decimated. And we were also working with the evac centers and the Canadian Red Cross to notify families of their losses. This became a bit of a challenge though, because the area was still very much considered a hot zone. So everybody wanted information, but the risk was if you tell somebody that their house is there today and it's still a hot zone, and then tomorrow it changes, that's almost worse. So it was just a tough time. The other thing that we did do through the EOC was we identified a demobilization and recovery lead to develop a recovery plan for the area because we knew very quickly that the recovery is going to take a very long time here. It's not going to be over in a week or two. And through the EOC, we could actually action and resource that appropriately. Our experience is once the EOC kind of stands down, everybody kind of goes back because we're healthcare and nothing stops. So that's why we identified that. We also did a consult with the Association of Healthcare Emergency Preparedness Professionals in Canada, and to see if there were recovery plans out there. Unfortunately, like we do response very well in healthcare, but recovery is a bit of a gap. There were a couple for Slave Lake and in Fort Mac, but a lot of the people involved in those have since kind of moved on or what have you. So there wasn't a whole lot that we could rely on, but we did find some stuff which was really helpful to help inform. So that was it's a really great partnership. If anybody's on the call that is familiar with those, like the best of the best. Just saying. So on the 17th, the Kingston fire was still out of control, but this is the first time that it didn't actually grow. And the weather was favorable, so we were looking, or they were looking at lifting evac orders in kind of a structured way. So like we could all breathe a sigh of relief, if you will. Um, the other thing that we did do on the 17th was we developed a briefing note asking or requesting 12-month additional mental health and primary care supports. So that was developed and submitted for approval based on the community impact. This included a proposal for U-Turn, which is a local mental health and addictions program, and peer mental health supports for first responders. So peer isn't an acronym, it's literally peers. And one thing that we did actually learn through this is that we could provide mental health supports for first responders that show up, but mental health support is an interesting thing. You really got to be ready for it, and a lot of the times, it's like stages that you go through. And the best bang for your buck is kind of to have a peer to sit down and have a coffee or tea with. And then once you realize that you've had that, somebody with own lived experience that's gone through it too, then that either people develop their own coping mechanisms or they need more help. And then that's when we can provide those resources. Because the other thing, we didn't want our staff going out into evac zones and burning out themselves. So if they would show up and no one would show up for them, they wanted to help, they were there to help, but it's one of the challenges. The evacuation planning continued in the eastern rural zone, but we started shifting our focus to recovery at this time too. So on the 18th, we deactivated the Eastern Rural Zone. We pivoted to a leadership group with daily touch points. The interface fire plan moved from 4 back to 2. And we were now supporting the evacuation center in Carbonear and first responders up the coast, up the northern shore, sorry. So mental health and primary care teams had been established at the evacuation center. We actually had, I think it was a team of 10 at one point there that was providing significant support for any of the evacuees. And I know it's a throwaway, but this was actually pretty significant. The Kingston fire got renamed to the North Shore fire on the 18th, and it was expected to be classified as being held in the coming days. The reason why is if you can imagine you're in Western Bay or Ochre Pit or Adams Cove, the news is constantly talking about Kingston fire, and you know your community is decimated, so you feel like you're not represented or spoke to. So calling it the North Shore fire actually did became more inclusive, if you will. So it did matter. So then from the 19th to the 28th, our leadership group remained active. Mental health, community sports, and primary care were all engaged, and full teams were established at evac centers. And the evac centers then began moving locations. So if you guys can kind of imagine the 28th now, that's getting close to school. And the first evac center in Carbonear was actually in a school. So they kind of had to prepare for that and demobilize. So they moved things around. Evac orders were lifted in a structured way. Evacuation centers were starting to be demobilized in a structured way. And we were moving our recovery plan to finalization. And what we did was we established a community health emergency management committee to oversee the plan for the future so that this recovery plan wouldn't get lost. Um, excuse me. So yeah, that was basically the response. Now we're into the Emergency Operations Center. I'm sure if folks on the call, if you're familiar with healthcare response and emergency management, this is probably no surprise to you. But ICS or incident command structure in healthcare is a challenge. But it doesn't mean that it can't function. So what we were actually able to do, we were able to leverage the existing management structure as much as possible. And we found that using the EOC ICS structure, It was fantastic for communication and authority, right? So just to kind of give you an example, we had the normal structure here. The incident commander was Fraser, was the manager, and we used the dyad model. So one of our senior director of physicians, Dr. Des Whalen, came in, subject matter expert, which really helped us when we were looking at evacuation of residents and patients based on clinical needs. And then we had our ops, planning, logistics, and finance. So under operations, for example, which were largely clinical, under our mental health and acute care, they all had teams under them. So what would normally be your branches or your groups or even your strike teams or task force, the management structure was already there. So like nobody would understand that terminology. We just basically said like you already have teams in under you, just make them work for this. And that's what ended up happening, and it functioned fairly well. The interesting thing that I personally found is that staffing is usually under ICS under logistics, but we found it better under planning because for us, logistics was support services, so like buildings and functions, that kind of stuff, and supply chain. Whereas operations is clinical, right? So that's your patients, patient care, nursing, that kind of thing. If staffing stayed under logistics, we tend to get kind of narrow focused, so they would almost just look at facilities type staff. Whereas in planning was able to tap into the acute world and to the logistics. So they were actually able to kind of integrate it all together and get a whole picture, which is why, I personally believe that planning gets neglected, but it was really everything in this. We also put our wellness officer under planning and our recovery lead under planning as well. It functioned fairly well. And then I'm just going to hammer on this one about the wellness officer. We had first established this in the Labrador Grenfell fires, and we did a consult with them to see how they picked. And I'll never forget it. Jen Foley's her name, and she's just a fantastic human being. But she said, Dave, basically, I found the best person that I knew. And everybody intrinsically knows who that person is. Like if you think about it, even in your workplace, I'm sure you can tell. And we did that, and it worked out perfectly. Even now, we actually did a debrief on this yesterday, and we learned, uh, sorry, we learned that the leadership group actually kind of still loosely tags the wellness officer. She walked around with a service dog or therapy dog, sorry, to um through the building and just kind of aiding with patients and that and staff and that kind of thing, which is yeah. Also, if you can get your wellness officer to bring in a therapy dog like puppies in EOCs, please do it. It's like the best thing in the world. Just saying. And then the demobilization unit, which is huge. Like once you realize that your response is kind of there, get that up and running as quick as possible because we so often move from response to response to response. Getting somebody kind of positioned to look at this and do it in a structured way is like it's worth its weight as well. Sorry guys, we got storms, so that keeps popping up. I apologize for that. So you guys can see the community impact here. Everything in red is where fire touched. Ocrapick Cove, Western Bay, Kingston and Adams Cove are in here. Like the communities were just decimated, right? And you can see down here is where Victoria is. So in all, 9 communities on the Northern Shore suffered hundreds of home losses. There's over 2,000 people that live in the community in the 9 communities. To give you perspective, there's 6,000 people that live in Carbonear. So if all of those people move to Carbonear, then that's an urbanization of Carbonear, which the demographics would have shifted. In those communities, the community church, school, and a center was lost. Also, this is kind of little known, but applicable to rural areas. Fire suppression efforts actually impact community water supplies. So the suppression that they have in water bombers actually can contaminate water wells. So that became a thing for anybody with their house on a well or any communities that were operating off of wells. The other thing on, even though people's houses may have been there, if they left their windows open or the garage door open or they left in a hurry, the smoke and the heat and all that, like when they got back, several homes had to be ripped down to the studs or the remediation would require considerable time. The interesting thing for us is that our NLHS Western Bay Clinic was untouched. And I'm going to skip over to the next one for a second to talk about survivor skill because The Western Bay Clinic was untouched, but several houses almost right around it were gone. So it there was no kind of rhyme or reason to it, and a lot of the communities were really community centric and community focused. So some people would have their houses there, and the neighbors that they grew up with for even generations sometimes didn't. So survivor guilt is a very, very, very real thing. But one of the things that ended up happening was because the Western Bay Clinic was untouched, we were actually able to provide care in the community for people. So instead of getting them to move to Carbonear for supports, we could actually provide it directly to them. So it was a silver lining, if you will. And of course, we're looking at major demographic changes to the area over the next 5 years, which is why we were really pushing the recovery plan. And speaking of the recovery plan, we had a detailed recovery plan covering several community-based programs, mental health and addictions, primary care, community supports. This plan had short, medium, and long-term priorities, and it also included funding for peer support. And it was actually 7 additional mental health resources for 12 months. One of these resources, as an example, is a guidance counselor in one of the schools that we identified when the school wasn't when the school was taken by the fire. So it was incredibly impactful to kind of be part of that we could actually bolster this response. But the reason why we wanted this recovery is we knew if demographics shift, what often happens is that the primary care would face the burden first. So in the next 3 to 5 years, you'd start seeing major overwhelm to your primary care because the demographics has shifted in the area. And we wanted this to kind of document that so that if we needed to bolster extra supports in place, if we had to continue these additional staff for more than 12 months, it was captured and that you could see that this is a direct result of that, which is also why we got so much buy-in on it. And the Community Health and Emergency Management Committee was established, and we've met 3 times so far. We established one of our debriefs, and that committee actually recommended psychological debriefs for our staff, which are actually occurring starting next week and running into the new year, um, which are also really, really, really good. It's something that our NLHS is starting to roll out. So we do what we call an operational debrief. That's our team that does that for process, and then the psychological debrief is done by a separate department in our organization. That they're really good at what they do. So what we learned, ICS is a challenge, but the EOC structure is effective in healthcare. So we leveraged existing management structures as much as possible, and as a communication authority structure, it's really effective. Even though we actually instituted operational periods and rotation for our EOC this time, um, there were issues with leadership going back to the normal role. So what we learned is that you don't really get a break in healthcare. So the leaders that stepped up into the command roles in the EOC, uh, what their normal jobs kind of kept going. So when they stepped out of the EOC, they went back to basically like they didn't take a break at all. They got overwhelmed, right? And then there's also the challenge of when you're operating in an EOC and you're making these decisions and you're operating at that level and allocating resources, you step back and like your normal staffing things kind of seem trivial. So it was a challenge that way too. The other thing that we learned is that community evacuations in Newfoundland and Labrador are supported by NL Health Services. So the Canadian Red Cross is fantastic at what they do. They're really good at evacuation centers. But we provide healthcare, so they're not as good if there's higher levels of care for people that are showing up. And one of the things that we need to do is we need to have a triage there for staff that knows what type of care that person needs. Can we actually bolster support in the evacuation center? Because what we really need to do is shield our emergency rooms from this. Because if there's no place for them at the evac shelter and we don't get it at there, then there's a chance that they may end up in the ERs, and that's what we want to shield. We can also work to place them in our long-term care facilities and that if there's capacity. So it's one of the things that we learned that getting NL Health Services staff in evac centers for when the community evacuates is again it's critical. And lastly, this goes back to the eye care in our vision. NL Health Services stat like the leadership just led with the core values of care. This everyone from the incident commander and the senior leadership to the frontline leaders, everybody kind of stepped up. We had staff coming from other zones to help support us. We all like I know somebody asked where the EOC was. The day that we put in the smoke mitigation measures that we weren't sure would work or not, we all basically stayed in the EOC as long as possible and we're there first thing in the morning. We were also checking in with frontline personnel and managers and that walking through the building, making sure that things were going. A large part is some of that's even being seen. So the staff and everybody don't feel like they're kind of being left alone and the decisions are being made in an office somewhere. It's actually people that are living and working through it. And that's a large part of empathy and care. Same thing with the mental health supports that were provided and the psychological debrief that's coming. People really moved mountains once it was identified that there was a need, which is, personally inspiring. We continue to do debriefs right now. Did one yesterday with our acute care and long-term care, and an after-action report will come with this with a bunch of recommendations, I'm sure. And staff from other zones showed up to help. And I think, yeah, that's about it. How'd I do for time? Did I move too? Did I talk too fast?
No, I think we're basically right at the right spot.
Yeah.
And actually, Dave, so a number of questions just started flying in at the end. So one was somebody was asking, when you mentioned this, assisting in triaging the evacuees that were at those evacuation shelters, were they just there to support people that presented with potential health needs? So they were just curious if you had any insight about what that process looked like.
Yeah, so it was a bit bumpy to begin with because again, like this was the first real interface fire that the health authority had experienced. The Lab City fire, everybody evacuated, but like the Lab City wasn't touched, thankfully. But what ended up happening at the evac shelters is that people with larger care needs, like even that wouldn't be able to sleep in a cot, but needed a bed, right? So what type of bed? We could provide hospital beds, but there that comes with its own separate challenges. Like you need power, and entrapment becomes a bit of a thing. So what we ended up having, we had a full team there that basically evaluated the care needs of the individual, and then made recommendations on our end for what it would need. So we got like beds in a box, I think it was. There's a technical term on it, I'm sure, but we just call it box beds that we were able to supply to the evac shelters or centers so that they could help. Then there's also the point of care things that you need for like prescriptions and regular care assessments and our community supports programs, for example, that are normally providing care to people in their homes. If they're at the evac shelters, then we can help there. So having a team that can triage those needs alleviated a lot of the burden on the Red Cross as well. Um, did that answer that question?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it sounds like obviously at one point you said everything's on fire. So really there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of different partners collaborating on responses at this scale. And I think you've answered that question, but then it segues into another question that somebody had, which was talking about, you mentioned primary care and mental health support had been mobilized in particular to help care for some of the first responders, like so the volunteer firefighters and so on. And somebody was asking, is this a plan that you already had in place as far as like providing those primary care and mental health supports to first responders, maybe as a lesson learned from, as you said, the summer before? Was this run as like a volunteer capacity, or was this actually like a staff redeployment?
Yeah, so this was actually a staff redeployment that we learned. And what we learned from the previous fires, like when Labrador City, for example, evacuated, we had core essential staff stay behind to help treat first responders in the hospital. So that was in the hospital setting, which was a little easier, right? We also had to set up kind of like an ambulatory care clinic in a local community because they lost access to their hospital, but that was a different beast. With this one, we basically it was almost like a forward operating team that we sent up. So we sent them into an evacuation zone, into a safe area that we knew that the first responders did identify that was uh, facilitated through the Provincial Emergency Operations Center in Newfoundland, Labrador, that would treat wounds and blisters and that kind of thing. We also had our paramedicine folks kind of come in and just do random checks on people if they kind of needed it. And then we could allocate resources based on there. But we didn't overly have a plan on that. We were basically just reacting and responding based on the needs and the requests that were kind of coming in. Because a lot of this was kind of unprecedented for us. Like we knew that we had to get people in the evac centers, and we knew very quickly based on the amount of people they were seeing there that we had to staff it up and that we had to get resources there. Um, but yeah, it's also a takeaway for us for sure. We're actually loosely calling what the staff would be there a health navigator. And out of the community debrief that we had, it was super interesting what they were talking about. They were like, yeah, we had somebody coordinating the beds, and then we had this person doing the care over here. And I'm like, so you guys you set up your own mini EOC at the evac shelter or evac center. And they're like, yeah, I guess we did. So that was it was super interesting learnings that way, and definitely a takeaway for us going forward in the plans that we'll bolster.
So then changing gears away from the supports that were provided there. Obviously, I mean, you made mention of like highway being cut off, or at one point the forestry ministry advising on like a potential sort of notice for the entire peninsula and the impacts that has on staff. So you talked about safe work plans for people that were having to travel in and out of these zones. My assumption is that obviously sort of like occupational health and safety and whatnot would be tied into this production, but somebody was asking what went into some of those plans, if you had any information about what that looked like.
Yeah, sure. So we set up the safety officer in our rural zone EOC, which was our occupational health and safety folks. And they built out a team for that as well. But a couple of things that check in, check out like what you normally would. If you're going up the shore, then the manager basically says, okay, I'm leaving now, and then you report back in when you get there. Also making sure that the spot that they were going to was vetted through the Provincial Emergency Operations Center and that first responders knew where you were going. They reported into the RCMP checkpoints. But a challenge and an added dynamic of this was that the large part of the area actually has no cell phone service or coverage. So we were able to leverage a radio system that we have in here that actually provides that. So we got one of them in and developed kind of like a check-in feature. It was almost like a spot device that they were using, but it was in their car. So if anything did happen, they could radio with their manager at any point, and then we could communicate to first responders. There was a lot of moving parts with all of this. And we were also really cognizant that they weren't moving through any areas where there was any active firefighting or anything like that, especially with water bombers and stuff like that. So it was really just a coordinated plan through our EOC, the provincial EOC, uh, and with the people who needed the help. The last thing on that too is we never sent anybody alone. And that's, I feel like for me, it's obvious reasons, but if you're going to provide mental health support to somebody who's experiencing significant trauma in what they're dealing with the community, even if there's an adverse reaction there, like we also need to make sure that our staff are protected and feel comfortable. So that was also part of it as well.
I'm curious because if we're talking about the notifications that were received, to say, hey, this is the area that has an alert, this is an area that's required to evacuate. Um, were you getting the memo at the same time as everybody else in a municipality, or did healthcare get a bit of an early heads up that, an evacuation was coming?
So the alerts, everybody got it similarly. We had a liaison in the Provincial Emergency Operations Center, which means that we did have a bit of an inside scoop, if you will. But a large part of this inside scoop is also there's a balance, right, between preparing and scaring everybody. So some of that information we kind of we would know so our team could plan, but that's kind of about the extent of it. When it came to mandatory evacuations of places, and we learned this from the Labrador fires as well. Same thing with repatriation. Um, Moving a healthcare facility is extremely difficult. Moving a healthcare facility with only two highways out of an area that everybody else is going to evacuate also comes with even more challenges. Moving a healthcare facility when the largest population center may be moving and all of your paramedicine support will likely be go there. Also created its own challenges. So a large part of this, if it had gone really sideways, would have been coordinated through the Provincial Emergency Operations Center, and we would have requested significant aid that would have been deemed necessary. Um, yeah.
I think I'll just pose one more question, and then we'll try and sum up. But just since you were talking about the repatriation, pardon me, element of this, at the end, somebody was asking about sort of reentry resources, for, residents and staff, people that are returning home after all of this. Did folks have some sort of like guidance or whatnot? You were saying some people's homes had to be completely remediated. So what were people being advised, including your staff?
Right. So most of because we would focus when we talk repatriation, we focus on healthcare. Like when it talks about the community, then that would fall to the Provincial Emergency Operations Center, which would largely be facilitated through the Canadian Red Cross. But what we did do is we did host in one of our facilities in Carbonear the conversation for any residents that did lose their homes. So we worked with the Canadian Red Cross so that that was done in a effective and compassionate way. Um, so like, we were able to do that. When it comes to individual homes, the Canadian Red Cross actually puts out a whole bunch of really good information on what you look for and what you do. When it comes to our facilities, this actually, again, as a result of the Labrador Grenfell, we developed a full resumption of services plan on which is actually multiple phases that we would execute if we had to repatriate a clinic or a facility. When we repatriated the Western Bay Clinic, because it was a smaller clinic and there was no beds, we followed that, but it was pretty scaled down, right? It's basically you send your infrastructure people through there to do whatever assessments, you get whatever inspections you need to make sure that the building is safe to reoccupy and that the smoke damage isn't there. And then you send in a clinical team to make sure that they have the supports they need prior to kind of opening, and then you support them as needed. Just a very basic thing. When it comes to moving patients, it's a little more complex. But one of the coolest things from the Labrador fires, and it was a patient care thing. One of the community members actually bought individual gifts for every long-term care resident as they came back, and a card that said "Welcome home," which was really really cool and patient focused and centered. So if we had to do that, we likely would have probably used that lesson too, just as a little thing.
We're at time. I wanted to kind of wrap up with a point that you had mentioned about the personal preparedness for staff. And I think if there's a key takeaway from this presentation, that's one, which is, as you noted, your own personal example of being located in one area, thinking that you have your children in a safe space so that you can focus on doing your job, only to discover that they might not be safe in the location that you've relocated them to. And so navigating all of those challenges, the best way is to make sure that we have as much preparedness done at the personal level in order to support us in being able to perform our jobs in healthcare. So Dave, I really appreciate it. It was a very comprehensive presentation about how you folks went through this last summer. I think there's a lot of takeaways that folks will be able to share with their teams coming from this. So thank you again so much for being our last speaker of 2025, Dave.
Thank you.
Francesco, over to you.
Thank you so much, Misha, and thank you so much, Dave, for that great presentation. It was fantastic, and yeah, I think you offered a lot of great insights that can be applicable across multiple emergencies. Um, so thank you as well to our audience for being here and for joining us for the 2025 series. As Misha mentioned, and I mentioned at the beginning, this is our last session of the year. So thank you so much to everyone who's consistently come and supported the series. And thank you to Dave and all of our speakers that we've had throughout the year. And thank you, of course, to Misha for all of the hard work in helping us put together such great sessions every month. Um, with that said, just a reminder that this session and all of our sessions this year were recorded and they're up on our YouTube channel, which was shared in the chat. As well, if anyone would like to connect with Dave or with any of our former speakers, please send me an email, which was also put in the chat, and I'll filter those questions through to the appropriate presenters. Um, This session is being recorded. I can't remember if I already said this. Sorry, the session's recorded, and it's on our YouTube channel along with all of the other sessions from the series. So please check out the YouTube channel as well, and please stay um, connected to our socials, which I also shared in the chat, as we will be coming back in 2026 with another uh, with a continuation of this series with our 2026 sessions. So there won't be any. Oh, thank you, Misha. Yeah, I was just about to say that there won't be any session in January, but we'll be back in February and we'll be releasing the full schedule of the 2026 series in January as well. So please stay tuned for that. Um, for those who are already registered, you won't need to register again, but please do share the registration with any friends, colleagues who might be interested. As the registration is always free and open. So thank you so much. I hope everybody has a great holiday. Um, and we'll hopefully see you all in the new year. So thank you one more time to everybody for making this such a great experience and such a great year for the 2025 sessions. With that, take care, and I hope everybody has a great rest of their day.